because they thought that they knew best. We see people being murdered in jails. We see people who have never been paid their wages for generations. And some of these atrocities are still happening today. We just look at New South Wales just this week and what's happened there, with what happened with the young Aboriginal boy there. The police threw him to the ground. The policeman thought it was okay to do that. The police commissioner thought it was okay to do that. And the Minister for Police also thought it was okay to do that. And it really worries me going into the future that that sort of behaviour is still acceptable in this country. I think what the police commissioner has done and what the Minister for Police has done is give the police the green light to continue doing this to our people. And it really concerns me. I'd also like to acknowledge the other Aboriginal people here tonight as well and thank them. This is a long campaign, the work that we're doing on CIE. CIE, the community is everything, is the campaign we started off. Do you just want me to go back to when I first started, the work we've been doing over the last 10 or 14 years? Or do you just want to work on the CIE, the kids and the justice? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll go and just work on the community is everything. We started off about 7 years ago talking about how our kids are being locked up in this prison system and how simple it is for our kids to get locked up. So we started working, we thought that we would start working on communities, everything, and we started trying to get the Commonwealth government to make change. But unfortunately, we couldn't get them to make change. So now we've started working on state governments and independent state government people, the attorney generals. And we've got to the stage where we've got, so the work we was doing, like when we go to a community, lots of times as Amnesty, if we go to Mount Isa, or if we go to Tennant Creek, or if we go to Fitzroy Crossing, not only are we doing work on communities, everything, but there's always something else crops up. Like if we go back to our previous history, we was working in at Tennant Creek, and within our work going around talking to people about raising the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 14. While we was there, because of our previous work, and we'd been there before, people was coming up and talking to us about people having to come 200 kilometres or 300 kilometres from their homelands to go into Tennant Creek to get training for CDP. So we've been trying to help address those issues. And the other things, and we was always trying to stop people from having to travel from their homelands, to keep people on their homelands, to keep them safe, keep their language strong and their culture strong and their family strong. So we're doing a bit of work around that area as well, because we was asked to when we was in Tennant Creek. We also come across in Tennant Creek, they was telling us about kids being put in police cages on the back of flat top utes with no seat belts and carted from Tennant Creek down to Alice Springs to the prison. So we've been doing some work on that, trying to stop the police from doing that, and we think it's a culture right through the Northern Territory that this is happening. So we're trying to get them to stop it. And they've admitted that they do it, but they said we only do it occasionally, and we've said that's not good enough, that we want that to be stopped altogether. So that's part of some of the things that happens on some of the trips that we go on. And this is some of the sort of byproduct work that comes out of doing it, trying to raise the age. And people tell us about kids from Tennant Creek or wherever we go, when the kids go into that prison system, and when they come back out, they're never the same. And we know that the prison system's not a place to rear children. We know that that system doesn't work. And we know that prison officers don't make good mums and dads. It's not their job. And you get a kid that goes in to prison if they've got FASD or any cognitive disorders, and then they're put in solitary confinement. It's horrific, and the consequences is horrific for those kids when they come out of that solitary confinement as well. We've seen the mistreatment in Banksia in Western Australia. We've seen mistreatment in Northern Territory at Dondale, and we've also seen mistreatment at most of the prison systems where detention is. We've seen it in Townsville. They brought kids was playing in the pool on a Saturday afternoon, and they told the girls to get out, and they wanted to stay for another, 15 or 20 minutes in the pool. So they brought the dogs in and had the dogs standing, savage dogs standing at the edge of the pool, trying to scare the kids out of the pool. So we've seen some, and then we've got, I'm using the tear gas on the kids in Dondale. We've seen in Banksia how the heating system, the cooling system was so out of date, and the kids was roasting in the prison, and they just got sick of it. The behaviour of the prison system is not working for our people, and the culture in those places can be pretty detrimental, as we've seen in Dondale and other prisons as well, in detention centres as well. So we know that, and it's all very well to have all these guards and systems in place, but come Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, when the people are not there to protect our children, till Monday morning, it's a long time. And we know things change of a weekend in those places. And there's very little protection for our kids. If our kids have got a grievance in this place, they've got to write it on a piece of paper and give it to the person, usually who's the one that's causing the problem towards them. And it's not working, and our kids just have nowhere to go in this system. So we've been talking as an organisation, we've been talking to a lot of people, a lot of Aboriginal communities around Australia, and they're telling us that having Indigenous-led solutions and having Indigenous diversion programs would be the best way for us to go forward in the future. So a lot of our programs are around what in CIE is about raising the age of criminal responsibility to 14, which is the international standard. And we want to make sure that Australia keeps to that standard. And we've had trouble trying to pin them on that. And, we've been lobbying all the Attorney Generals, because all the Attorney Generals have got a meeting on the 27th of June. And they're talking it's called, I think it's called their COAG, but they call it a CAG meeting. And we're trying to get all the Attorney Generals. We've got all the children's commissioners from all around Australia. They've agreed that raising the age to 14 is a good thing to do. We've got other groups that are saying that. Grandmothers Against Removals, they're talking about it. They think it's the most important. And so we're trying to seize the opportunity for people to write to their Attorney General from each state and ask them to make sure that they're going there to raise the age, to get the other Attorney Generals to raise the age to 14. So that's a bit about the work that we do, that we've been doing, and we've been campaigning strongly in each state to try and get them Attorney Generals to make sure they know that what we're talking about is important. It's important for the kids in that system.
Thank you very much, Rodney, for that. We can start with the speakers if you're okay with it. I would ask Peter, who's the writer of the film, together with Roy McLeod, a bit about this dual reality that you probably found yourself in, Peter, where you could see the clash of the two cultures. So the rights of natures versus really the profit and this agriculture that is designed just to make money. So the question would be, how do you see your documentary in all this? Do you think you can make a difference, and what difference can your documentary make?
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia, and good evening, everyone. Coming to you from Jara country, home of the Jajarurrung people, and I reckon I'm not exaggerating to say I'm in the most beautiful part of it, but all you can see is the inside of my house. Yeah, look, you make this film came out of a morning when that video came around on Facebook, and you know, I don't normally look at Facebook, but I just happened to, and there's this picture of you know, these blokes in the river with a huge dead fish, and they spoke from the heart about, you know, this shouldn't happen. And we just, people won't know, Rory is my son, and he just happens to live on the same farm here. So we were sitting there, and I said, we should do something about this. So Rory's a filmmaker and has all the gear, and I'm an anthropologist, and sort of knew that what was happening wasn't making the news. We were hearing about the dead fish, but we weren't hearing about the fact that actually I knew this was having a really big impact on First Nations people up and down the river. This was no small thing. And we just said, why don't we go and document this? Why don't we just go and see what we get? And so within an hour, we packed the car and disappeared off to Menindee and found the right people to talk to, or, you know, as best we could. And, you know, one person led to another, and we started what turned out to be our big project, making this film. And, you know, we did it because you can't just always sit there and be angry and depressed. And you realize eventually that signing another petition is really just not enough. And we just put our skills together and said, let's have a go at doing something more significant. And, you know, in a sense, it wasn't just about the river, because this feeling of impending catastrophe is, you know, it's just growing. It's like a rising tide around your feet, and then your ankles, and then your knees. You know, so in 2018 and 2019, we saw a vast river system go dry at unspeakable cost. And that was a tragedy for First Nations people. It was a tragedy for nature. And it was a tragedy for all of us, because, you know, if you think you're not part of nature, think again. What happens to nature happens to you. It happens to me. It happens to all of us, no matter who we are or where we are. It might take longer to feel it. If you're rich or a long way away, but you'll feel it. And you know, you put that together with the litany, the tragic litany of other things that are going on. So in recent years, we've seen half of the Great Barrier Reef die. We've seen the death of hundreds of kilometres of mangroves in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Yeah, who knows that? Did you hear that on the news? No, you probably just heard it from me. The graves of ancestors on islands in the Torres Strait are being washed out of the earth by rising sea levels. And, you know, then just the other thing that slipped by this last summer, millions of short-tailed shearwaters never arrived from Alaska, because the krill blooms that are supposed to happen in Alaska, and these birds feed themselves up to the eyeballs on krill to give themselves the strength to fly across the world to southern Australia. Those krill didn't happen because of climate change, and the millions of birds were supposed to arrive, thousands actually arrived. So, yeah, we've got these utter catastrophes happening around us. And most of us you know, we don't know about it. It seems a long way away. Oh, it's just some birds. Oh, it's just some old river up there. Well, no, if it's happening in the world, it's happening to you. And I suppose what I want to say here is that these events are intimately connected. They're not just because we're all a part of the world, but so take the river. Yes, climate change was a part of that because it created a drought which produced conditions for a lot lower flows. But there's a much more important connection, and that is the actions and inactions of humans. And what have humans done? They've created an economy. You know, for a while there, it was capitalist, and that was pretty destructive. And then we tightened the screws on capitalism, and we created a thing called neoliberalism, which places economic efficiency. Now that means making the most money. Let's be real. You know, economic efficiency. That is one value that has come to dominate all other values. Now think of a river. What are the values in that river? Well, personally, I might like to go up there and sit under a tree or catch a fish. There's First Nations people who are deeply, intimately, fundamentally connected to that river. And I couldn't begin to speak about that. There's the values of all of those trees, all of those microbes, all of those yabbies, all of those fish. I mean, there are literally trillions of creatures living in that river system, and the values of all of those things that matter have been pushed aside and subverted or just ignored because somebody can make money, because it's economically efficient to pump the water out and grow cotton or whatever crop. And the thing is, this isn't just happening on the river. We can see the same valuing of economy in just about every aspect of life. And you know, we lose the natural world and we lose a part of ourselves as this happens. And I'm personally feeling like, you know, the water is not up to my knees. I'm feeling the water is up to my chin, and I'm desperately worried. And so it got to the point where, well, you know, making a film seemed like a good idea, but you know, here we are talking, so it's achieved something.
Well, what responses have you got after the documentary, Peter?
Well, I'm disappointed that the National Party hasn't firebombed my house or something. I'd love to have got up their nose a bit more than I have, but I suppose, you know, it's been, you know, sometimes you feel like you're preaching to the choir, but, you know, we've got people talking, and I know there's a lot of people out there who have, we've been to, before this COVID-19 business, we did a lot of screenings through Fanforce in cinemas, and people came out speechless with anger. They came out just so upset, people crying because they just didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what the cost of that was, how that affected other people. So in a way, you know, one of the things we set out, Rory and I set out to do, and I think, you know, I'm pleased, was to bring First Nations voices to the front, and because media had been utterly ignoring Aboriginal people in this story. You know, apparently a story about a dead fish is more important than the people who are feeling this deeply. So yeah, we were setting out to do that, and well, you can judge for yourself, but personally I'm pretty happy with how that went. I mean, I know we could have made a film 10 times longer with all the voices who wanted to speak with us. You know? And this was the thing, it was, you know, everybody was just so delighted, you know, in Wilcannia, in Menindee, in Broken Hill, in Burke, in Brewarrina, in Walgett. I want to speak. I want to tell the world what has happened to me, what I am feeling. And you know, the media, the bigger media, was so slow to pick that up. And even, you know, this film has been put on SBS on demand, but it was aired on NITV, and that's fine. NITV is great. That's Aboriginal people talking to Aboriginal people. That's great. But this film is Aboriginal people talking to whitefellas. This is Aboriginal people standing up and saying, hey, this is what your system has done to me. And marginalizing that into NITV was a big mistake in my view. It was very, well, very unfortunate. So I don't know whether there's political pressures involved. I don't know whether they just didn't really get it. But, or maybe I'm just blowing my own trumpet. I don't know. But
well, let's hope it's just a start, Peter. That it's just go to everywhere. Yes,
it's a start. And, you know, I think, I mean, there have been many of these Q&A sessions, you know, in cinemas, on Skype or Zoom, and you know, every time I think people come away saying, wow, I didn't know how bad it is.
Yeah.
And the thing to remember is, you know, we have, you know, the Darling River system, the Barker, about a third of the water that should be in that river over the recent history has been taken by floodplain harvesting. And floodplain harvesting, you know, it's either outright illegal or its legality is highly dubious, or has been for most of that time. But that was allowed, it was aided and abetted by governments, by New South Wales government, by ministerial decisions, and by the federal government, and the divisive politics of particularly Barnaby Joyce playing up the irrigators versus the greenies line, you know, just dog whistling to people who were being called to vote against their own interests. But yeah, hey, it works. So, you know, it turns out we have government playing its games in order to, you know, cultivate power. And then you look a little deeper and you start to realize that it's how democracy is for sale, that, you know, paid lobbyists are able to access politicians, and political decisions do not, you know, these political decisions, such as the decision to destroy a river. Oh, we weren't destroying a river, we were just helping some farmers. Those decisions are, you know, they're not made with the benefit, with the intention to benefit people. They're made with the intention to benefit a few particular people. And those people have probably paid, or they've made some promises, or, you know, a nice sinecure on the board of our company, or, you know, so it turns out we don't own our own democracy. And this is the underlying thing, that this, you know, we start off saying economic efficiency is stupid and wrong, and then we realize that the entire way the rules are made is wrong. And so we need to work really hard. There's a big global movement around this. Maybe it's a little global movement, but laws that actually protect the environment, laws against ecocide. And why can't the people who made those terrible decisions regarding the taking of water in the Northern Basin, why can't they be held to account? Oh, they got voted out, or they didn't. And, you know, there's no comeback. There's no cost to a bad decision, except to all of us, except to everything. So, yeah, I suppose I'm trying to point out here that, you know, everything is linked, and that the darkness at the heart of it all is some very powerful people making sure that they get to keep their toys. And the rest of us, well, you know, we can all go to hell. And, you know, the cost to this, It's to everyone alive now. It's to First Nations people. It's the Yabbies, and it's to the generation who are not even born yet.
Exactly.
And that is the thing. There's generations yet to come who are going to face a collapsing planet. And why? Because our politicians don't care. No, they do care. They just care about the wrong things.
Exactly.
So, look,
they don't feel the river. They don't have any sense for the river. Just have a sense of what makes money. So, can we ask? Would you like to say something else, Peter, about this?
Well, I could probably slow down about now, but I'll save the rest for questions if anyone has any at the end. Okay. So we can move on if you want to.
We would love to hear Uncle Bruce's point of view on this. You know, Bruce, how do you see it culturally? What is the river? What does it mean culturally? How unsustainable have we been? What can we do?
Can I pass that on to Stephanie? Because I'd rather a female have a bit of input there, and then I can go after Stephanie. It would be great.
Sure.
Oh, thank you, Uncle. Yeah, well, I won't take too long. Yeah, I'm Gamilaroi from northern New South Wales. I was born in Collarindabrine. I'm one of 14 children, so from that way. And I've still got family that live that way, but I'm down on, like Peter, I'm down on Judgerung country down here in Victoria, and it was about -2 or something this morning. But last year I was in the Kimberley teaching in Broome, and I'd just like to share that about an hour ago I was on their webinar and they were talking about the Fitzroy River. And I only had a couple of minutes at the end, and then I cried thinking about this, for us to have this conversation. Just because, you know, they're fighting for their river up there, the mighty Fitzroy. And, you know, our rivers have just been exploited beyond belief, you know. And so I only had 2 minutes and I just sat there with them and cried. And Dr. Anne Polini, who is an Aboriginal activist and researcher in Broome around the Fitzroy, she said some amazing words. So, and what I was able to hear from them, if you don't mind me sharing, is that there was about 30 people talking about the research and about the river having voice. And it was amazing to listen to these people, and particularly some of the Aboriginal women, talk about the idea that we think, you know, there's this thing as human and non-human, you know, but the river is alive. The river has its own voice, its own way of telling us things, you know. And it was an amazing conversation that you might want to be able to link in and listen to for yourself at some stage. But I got lots of insights from these women up there and men talking about the poisoning of their river and what's going to happen to the Fitzroy. And I said about this meeting, and I said how we need to have these joined voices about water, you know, like, and how Aboriginal people see the rivers, you know, and what they mean to us. So my little bit was actually through knowing Pete, was about just growing up as a child on the river. You know, like I said, I was born in Collie there, and you know, the idea of a kid squishing that black mud in your feet, you know, finding the mussels, having your feet with the shrimps, you know, the shrimp nets in, being able to grab your billy and grab the water and put it on the fire and make a cup of tea right then and there. They were the things that just as Aboriginal people, you know, living well close to the river. But my mum was a language teacher so spoke the Gamilaroi language and was a teacher there in Lightning Ridge and Collie and that, and we've got family around Walgett and that as well. And so what she used to tell us, we used to live Lightning Ridge, and as we drove heading towards Walgett, she used to tell us the story about the Great Warrumble and that floodplains there, and say that if you were in a, you know, spaceship, you could see this country. You know, there was that floodplain there that was alive with everything, and it was there. And the image is in the Milky Way. So there's that, when you look at that night sky, so now, I think from March to October, and some of you other Aboriginal people will know there, you know, when the emu is changing, and that story is up there, that that giant Warrambul is there in the sky, you know. So you see those old fellas, all those stars, those old fellas, fires in the stars, you know. Our dreaming is there. So they're connected, you know. So Mum used to tell us that story every time we'd go, and then when our kids come along, and I was saying to Pete earlier that I rang my brothers today. I used to ring my mum before I talked, but sadly she's passed away, and all my family's passed away. And so I rang my two brothers, Ted Fernando. Ted lives in Canamble there, and Mark, my other brother, and just to talk to them. And we just laughed about all those times in the river, you know, and it makes your heart sing. But if we have that, if we don't look after those floodplains, you know, it's not just about the water that comes down in the centre. It's about all that happens around the river as well, that's provided us with stories and connection to that country. And so as the river gets poisoned and things happen.
And also what you were saying.
Sorry?
You were saying it was very beautiful, Auntie Steph, you were saying that very beautiful thing of having a sense of the river, not just the river itself, but the river is also the floods, is also the floodplains, is also all that, which is very beautiful. And that's what we're really missing. So when we see
it has its own course, you know, like it's gone for tens of thousands of years. It has flown and been the way it has been. And I think if we don't think of it as something that's not alive, you know, it's had its own way of living, and we're choking it, you know, like we're literally squeezing the life out of something, you know. I really don't see, like I said, I just cried today thinking about this yarn tonight, that we don't understand what we're doing. It's as if, you know, humans are not the most important thing. We just forget that we are part of something much bigger, and we've been like that. And I go back to Anne and what she was saying, Dr. Paulini was saying tonight. She was talking about their Fitzroy River is an ancestral being. He has his own way of living. He is there and been living there. And that's what I'd like us to be looking at and thinking about our river system. You know, it's one of the longest river system there. And like I said, it just flows over into those floodplains. And when I go home and I can start seeing that, you know, that flat land, my husband looks across at me because he knows I'll be smiling, you know, when I'm heading home. And he said, most people just see something flat and they think of it as nothing. You know, people would just drive through that country, black dirt, whatever, blowing behind them. But for me, I know I'm feeling like that's my spirit. I'm coming home to that country and that river. So if that's taken away, you know, that's where our spirit dies.
I feel,
thank you, Uncle.
I feel, Steph, at the moment, like somebody's got their knee on the throat of that river.
Exactly. We can always hear the river saying, I can't breathe. Isn't that right? Mm. The same exact thing, yeah. So Uncle Bruce, would you like to say something?
Well, just to follow on what Peter said and Stephanie, and Rodney probably add a little bit more later on. Look, I want to talk about why the rivers and the waterways is so important to our people, my people. First Nation people have been here for so long. My people have seen the destructions of our rivers and our land for over 250 years. Now people are starting to wake up. Why? Because the rivers are completely gone and it's affecting everyone that relied on our rivers and waterways. I call it corporate greed. It's greed. We've got a small amount of people, a group that's controlling the rivers and the waterways. They turned our rivers, our waterways into a commodities. It's there to make money, to create profits for themselves. Sadly, our governments are a part of that. Our government is a part of the corruption that are going on for the last 10, 20 years. My people, there's over 40 nations that lives along the river, Murray-Darling, that river that runs through 4 states, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. Like I said, they've lived on the rivers for a long time. They relied on the river for their food source, for their survival. Now, when that river disappears, we die. Our traditional stories, our songlines, then become deceased and they disappear. So our practices and our stories will be stopped. They will stop being passed down to the next generation. What a sad thing to say. In the Murray-Darling, the Barker, been empty for about 8 or 9 years. Where did I take my kids to fish when there was no rivers? How do I tell them stories about the yellowbelly, the long-necked turtles, the 50-year-old cods? Where have they gone? Our sacred sites along the rivers, special sites for all the nation that lives along the river, have been destroyed and desecrated. I believe that First Nation people need to take a class action against this Australian government. The river is a person, so who then speaks for that river? Who is the voice for that river? The First Nation people should be the voice for that river and that waterway. In Wanganui in New Zealand, the river is a person now. It's got rights just like a human being, normal person. Why can't we do it to our river, the Barker? Let's take up the challenge. Let's take it to the international courts, because it's the only way that we're going to get this government to answer to us. It's through the international courts. First Nation people need to now to unite. We need to come together for the survival of our communities and for our race and for our nations. We are suffering. Our health is now deteriorated. Our waters have been polluted. Who's drinking that water that's been poisoned? By the cotton farmers, by the big agriculture. My people, First Nation people, they've got a high rate of diabetes. They're now dying on dialysis, high blood pressure, high sugar levels. The health of my people are killing my people, because the river's sick. And my people are becoming sick. High rate of suicide. Mental health. That's what is creating in the environment. 20, 30 years ago, hundreds of years ago, before colonisation, my people were healthy. They didn't have the sickness and diseases what they got today. They didn't die young. My mother's in her 90. She lived healthy off the bush tucker and the fresh water. Her mother lived till over 100. Why were they so healthy? Look at our river, the Barker now. We've got to make these people accountable. The National Party, Barnaby Joyce, these politicians need to be answered for what they've done. Our local government and state government and federal government need to be held accountable. That's what it's done to our people. But look, we're here. The doco, when the river runs dry, done a great job. Got that awareness out there. A lot of people don't know what's happening in our rivers, especially the folks that live in the city. The Yamagana-Barker corroboree last year with the convoy to those country towns brought the awareness of what's happening in our rivers and our communities. First Nation voice need to be heard. First Nation voices need to be a part of the decision making of the Murray-Darling, the Barker. So where is our representatives? Where is the voice for the Barker? We are that voice. Start listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uncle Bruce. Thank you. Thank you. And we can actually move all these questions to Dr. Emma Carmody, who's a lawyer, special counsel, environmental lawyer, dealing especially with water in the Murray. Emma?
Hi everyone. Thank you.
Hi. What do you reply to that? That's a big one for you. Where is the voice for the Barker? Why is it so difficult for traditional owners to be heard legally?
It's the question. It's the question, isn't it? Thank you. Thank you, everyone who spoke before me. I'd like to acknowledge that though we're all meeting in cyberspace, I'm currently seated here on Gadigal lands, the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present. Thank you. And I'd like to start by thanking Peter for making his beautiful film and for asking me to be part of it. I feel very honoured to have been included in what was such a moving and important documentary. And it's important because it brings an important story that, as Peter quite rightly pointed out, an important story that really hasn't hit the mainstream media or hadn't hit the mainstream media. It brings it to a much wider audience. I've been an environmental lawyer for 17 years and I've been working on water now for about 12. And a constant struggle up until a few years ago really was the constant question or the struggle was how do we bring this story, the stories of First Nations people, the story of the environment to a broader audience? How do we make people care about this? So what you've done is really significant. And I'd just like to acknowledge that, Peter, and acknowledge all of the other people who appeared in the film and told their story. When I started to think about what I might talk about today as a lawyer, I couldn't help but consider the context of the last few weeks and how poignant it is that we're all meeting here today. It's in honour of Reconciliation Week, but poignant given what's been going on internationally and in Australia. And I reached the conclusion that really what I need to talk about is the interface between racism and water law. And it's a conversation that people don't want to have. It's not something that people commonly acknowledge, that our water laws are fundamentally racist. But for all of the reasons that were mentioned by Uncle Bruce and Auntie Steph, by Peter, Rodney, our water laws, like so many other of the organising principles in our society, in our white European society, they are fundamentally racist. And they're racist essentially because they're designed in their essence to do two things. They're predominantly designed in the first instance to facilitate the delivery of water often in highly modified systems with lots of infrastructure, which is the case in most of the Murray-Darling Basin. They're designed to facilitate the delivery of water for consumptive purposes. And that predominantly means agriculture, irrigated agriculture. So that's the first organising principle. And the second, to a lesser extent, and this is something that we've seen become embedded in water laws and environmental laws over the last 10 or 20 years, the second is to deliver some degree of protection to the environment. But I think it's manifestly clear to everybody that that level of protection is woefully inadequate, or the Darling River wouldn't have ended up in the state that it was. It's not just a product of drought, it's not even just a product of climate change, although that's significant. The climate is changing and it is having an impact on how much water is flowing through the Darling River, for example, and the frequency of flooding. But a contributing factor remains, a significant contributing factor remains over extraction. We are simply taking too much water out of the river. It's not sustainable. And it's important that in our effort to raise awareness about the impact of climate change on our river systems, that we don't lose sight of the fact that actually they are still over allocated. We must properly acknowledge that, and any remedy, any legal remedy has to acknowledge that they are over allocated. It cannot all be attributed to a changing climate. So they're the two principal organising notions or theories underpinning our water laws. And I'd have to say that in the Murray-Darling Basin, unfortunately, the rights and interests of our First Nations people, they remain largely an afterthought in our water laws. And I'll give you a concrete example. And this is nothing I'm saying really is going to be surprising to a lot of you, but I'll give you a concrete example. Our main piece of federal environmental legislation designed to protect water is called the Water Act. And it was passed by the Howard government in 2007. And it was passed in acknowledgement of the fact that our rivers and our aquifers in the Murray-Darling Basin were over allocated. We were simply taking too much water out of them. It was not sustainable. And it wasn't sustainable to manage our water, our rivers along state boundaries, because of course water continues to flow. It doesn't acknowledge those artificially imposed legal boundaries. And it's that piece of legislation that is responsible for the basin plan. It requires the Commonwealth Government to create and pass what we call the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, which you all would have heard of. So from an environmental perspective, the Water Act is a good piece of legislation. It hasn't been legally implemented in the sense that the Basin Plan does not reflect the legal requirements of the Water Act, but the Act itself is arguably quite a good piece of environmental legislation. However, the objects of the Act, and this is really instructive, and it goes back to what I said at the beginning about the two key organising principles of water laws in this country. The objects of that Act, they do not even mention, let alone acknowledge, Aboriginal people, First Nations people. So when the objects of the Act, which really set the tone for all of the substantive provisions that follow thereafter, when those objects don't even acknowledge First Nations peoples and their relationship with water and their sovereignty over water and native title, then you can imagine the rest of the Act isn't really going to deliver anything substantive for Aboriginal people. At best, the Act requires consultation and acknowledgement in other legal instruments which govern how water is shared at a catchment level, acknowledgement of the rights and interests of Aboriginal people, but they don't actually translate into anything binding, anything that I could really take to court to to improve outcomes for Aboriginal people. I think I represent a lot of different, I have the privilege of working with and representing and advising a lot of Aboriginal people in different parts of the Murray-Darling Basin. And what they all tell me is that, and this is without exception, which is quite extraordinary, what they all tell me, and I've observed it myself, is that the consultation that is undertaken, all of it, to use the common word, is tokenistic. The frame of reference is the way you would consult with a white person. It's based on the transactional language of bureaucrats. It's not in any way designed to make Aboriginal people feel comfortable or to have any real impact. Really, a decision's been made about how the legislation works, and the consultation at best is just an opportunity for Aboriginal people to comment on what is a fundamentally European way of managing water. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and Uncle Bruce touched on it, is the commodification of water. So the other thing my Aboriginal friends and clients and colleagues tell me is that separating land and water is anathema to them. It's something that goes against everything that they feel and understand about the relationship they have with land and water. Land and water shouldn't be separated. So when water markets were created, water was separated from land, and it's now held on a separate title, a water entitlement, which is a species of property. It's a $20 billion market, or set of markets, series of markets in the Murray-Darling Basin, and like all markets, there are winners and losers. You have to have a lot of money to participate in the market. So put quite simply, for the average person, for an Aboriginal person, it simply just is not possible. Even if you wanted to participate in a very pragmatic way, it just isn't possible, because you need considerable resources to buy any meaningful volume of water to have an impact and to generate cultural flows. And that's, you know, again, that's even, you know, without kind of interrogating this idea of separating land and water, which is anathema to Aboriginal, as I understand it, Aboriginal relationship with the environment. I think I'll just finish by circling back to something Auntie Steph said. Auntie Steph, you referred to Dr. Anne Polina. I had the pleasure of meeting Anne last year. I went down to Melbourne to attend a conference at Melbourne University. I took my baby, actually, who appears in Peter's film. I took her with me. It was a conference on legal personhood, and part of it was looking at legal personhood in rivers. And Anne gave a very moving presentation, and she spoke in language which was beautiful to listen to. And she said something that has stayed with me, really resonated with me on a very deep level. She said that that we the custodians of the Murrawari, which is the Fitzroy River, we don't believe that the river belongs to us. We believe that we belong to the river. And I think if that was the principle that underpinned our water laws, we would all stand to benefit. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you very much, Emma. That's quite something to think about. Thank you. Anyone has...
Sylvia, I'd just say to that last comment from Emma,
Yeah.
you know, a child right raised by its parents. And I think a river has the right to be cared for, but, you know, this is the way we need to start seeing things. When we're ready to become went up. Settlers are ready to become Australian. This is the way we will start to think, and stop. Stop. Anybody there?
Yeah, Peter, I can't hear you anymore. Can you?
I just seemed to freeze for a while there. Anyway, go on. Somebody else. Off you go.
Can I just say something?
Of course.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Look, just to add a little bit more on what Emma's saying, I can see how our Australian government and the leaders of this country have violated international law. They have violated the Constitution, Australian Constitution. They have violated the law of First Nations people. The people's First Nation rights to water. So I believe there's a challenge there. These laws were not made by First Nation people. These laws were made by non-Indigenous people. The colonial laws, the Constitution of this country has got a clause in there, it's got a saying in there that said that water should never be used to make profit or be to be sold off. So they've broken their own constitution. When this Australian government, the leaders are going to start to recognise First Nations rights to our land and water. That's my problem, that's my issue. So we need to do something very quickly. We need to work very quickly. I believe First Nation people along the waterways are now going to start to unite and come together and start talking, and start representing our land and our waterways.
And in fact, Auntie Steph, your sister did something about that, did she?
Yeah, look, last Easter there was about 60 of us, Aboriginal women, and they came from up in Queensland all the way down the river, and we all met at Walgett there. And over the couple of days, that's where we were looking to set up a Women's Water Alliance, First Nation Women's Water Alliance. So they've got, I think they have now about, I don't know, I was hoping Deb might have been on. But yeah, they have got a group of, you know, at the moment, a range of women along that waterway that have started having conversations, and I know there are others. So I think I agree with Uncle Bruce that, you know, it has to be that combined voices of really looking at, you know, the spirit of the river, and that, and something else Anne said that to me was that idea about ancestral rights, you know, like we talk, you know, in some of our, you know, Christian and different places across the world of different religions or spirituality or belief system rule with almighty, you know, sort of, you know, has this sort of power.
Yeah.
Well, our ancestral rights that have been here for 40,000 years, you know, like if people, and for all Australians, you know, this is about our country together, you know, and being able to be an ally and really support First Nations people, you know, to have something, you know, change comes when people have some humility of that other people might have a way to fix things up. It's not one person's way and one law that it's been bounded down on us, you know, whereas a law that's been around that is very clear about looking after country and having that connection and heart. And, you know, we talk about health and well-being, you know, and I know over this time all over Australia with COVID-19, people are talking about people's health and well-being. well, you know, for the ancestral spirits of the river, you know, this is a law being, you know, placed in front of us, that we have to have some humility, that there is bigger powers than us as humans. You know, we have to put some love in this space, that this thing that we are, you know, or this beautiful spirit that we're choking and you know, treating so badly. And it was like Uncle Rodney's saying about, you know, our children and our country, and, you know, that how can you just keep kicking and treating people so, you know, and when I'm talking about people or living things or not living things, everything so poorly within our country, you know, like we're all interconnected. We all have a relationship with one another, with country, with river, with the spirits above us, you know. I just, you know, like I just can't think of the pain that you are putting, people put things through for money, you know, like it's yeah. You can't be always crying and always angry. And I just think, yeah, First Nation people are just, you know, I was saying to Pete, I was laughing with my brothers today. That's what we do, you know, that humor and that, and we just keep, you know, I don't sort of say much about resilience, our resistance to get up and keep fighting, like Uncle Bruce's strong words there, you know, that we just see this as too important. You know, we've been here for so long. We're not people to stand or sit back. You know, we've walked this country and we've fought and struggled for it, and we continue. And what I would really put out is that others that are our allies that are watching and listening in tonight, you know, get beyond the likes of Uncle Bruce and Uncle Rodney there to really support a change that needs to occur for all of our well-being, you know, and that, yeah, our ancestors and our, you know, our ancestral rights are very clear, and I think law, you know, a bit like some laws elsewhere, should really be taken to task about the way that they've treated us and our spirits.
Absolutely. Thank you, Auntie Steph. Thank you. That's beautiful. Anyone else would like to say something? Do we have any questions for the speakers? I don't see any. No. Emma, would you like to just give a last comment on this? Is it, do you see a possibility, a way out legally, a future?
I always see a future. I think you have to be optimistic. You have to be optimistic. I see the future. I see that the future depends on people working together, and it depends on the government actively listening to our First Nations people on their terms. It depends, I guess, on people like me, someone who is an ally of traditional owners, working with them to try and understand how it is I might be able to use my legal skills to help them improve water sovereignty, obtain water sovereignty. But I do think if there's going to be water justice for Aboriginal people in this country, we do need to reorganise the way water law works at a fundamental level, because at the moment, at best, the Aboriginal voice, Aboriginal needs, they're kind of an addendum. They're a bit of an afterthought. I think we need to kind of change how they work from the ground up.
There's a question from Ivan. Is there a legal way forward for entitlement like native title rights taken to the High Court?
It's a good question. One of the fundamental paradoxes is that the law of water markets doesn't speak to the law of native title. Go figure. So you can have native title over a river, but if you aren't able to participate in the market and purchase large volumes of water, sufficient to deliver cultural flows at the right times and in the right places, then you may not be able to meaningfully exercise your native title rights. But I think Uncle Bruce has put the challenge out there for the lawyers to work with our First Nations people and see what we can do.
Yeah. Okay. And Sabine is asking whether petitioning or writing letters to politicians, well, of course, always, that doesn't hurt. But I don't know. Yeah. Peter, what's your view?
Yeah, I'm a little bit jaded with the petition front, but yes, you almost need to do it. But oh, did it ever make a difference? I think Bill Arnold's just put up a comment: we must stop floodplain harvesting, and I couldn't agree more. It's a vile practice based on a deliberate and egregious misunderstanding of how a river works. Both Steph and Bruce have talked about, the river is so much more than the channel, and this is the truth. The river, where we did a screening in Castlemaine back in how long ago? Must have been February, and as we were sitting there in the cinema, the news was coming in about where the water was in the Darling. And, it's just reached, it's about to reach Wilcannia, and somebody gets on their phone and says, oh, no, it hasn't, it's already there, and this is sort of excitement. But it's also so tragic because, yes, the water was running down the channel, but the water is not flooding out of the channel, and that is what the river has to do its job. And so everybody's getting excited about something that they should be angry about, because the truth was that this vast amount of water had been taken out of the Culgoa River by Cubby Station. And I don't know how many other places in Queensland and New South Wales, or particularly Queensland, had, because of their peculiar private weir arrangements, vast amounts of water had already been taken out of the river, to the point where, yes, there was water in the channel, and we can pretend we've got a river. But the reality was that water should have been flowing out across the floodplain and watering, countless millions of trees and other creatures and birds, and it should have been out there for everybody and everything. But it wasn't. And so, we had the ABC running these pathetic things out of Queensland saying how wonderful it was because the river was flowing, and, we've tested the system, and yes, Cubby Station let some through. It's like, oh, for goodness sake. We've got to see it. We've got to remember there's a review of the Murray Darling Basin plan coming up, I think in 2022. And we need to get the facts of this out there in front of the public in a way they can understand really urgently. Because if the broader public is across this, they won't be taken in by the rubbish. And but the complete crap that's put out there by the irrigators. Somebody went going so far as to say the water that's taken by floodplain harvesting doesn't take from people downstream. This is just nonsense, ecological nonsense. And yeah, it's just, so we've got to get these stories out there, I suppose.
Yeah,
and, this is a really urgent thing.
And in my head, Pete, I was thinking, the way that we do is not always just like with Aboriginal people. It is about telling stories, so you can tell it in film or whatever. But there are other ways. It'd be lovely to get songwriters. And I know we've had a range of, there's a range of wonderful First Nation singers and that too. But I'm just thinking, with you thinking of 2022, and I'm a bit like you, Emma. I'm one of my things is, I'm always hopeful, otherwise as Aboriginal people, we'd just curl up and do nothing. So, but there's no way, we won't do that. So, because I'm always thinking of my, granddaughter and great-grandchildren, So it's that idea of why not think about other ways that we could do it? You know, is there a author amongst us who could do a beautiful children's book? You know, all that stuff you're saying, Pete, to make it clear for people. So the way that we've always told stories is through mapping. You know, here is this map and people can see exactly what happened so that the message can get out to more people. So I'm just thinking of delivering it. Yes, you can have petitions, and now we've got a beautiful film that we can have a discussion. Is there someone amongst us, or can you find, you know, a range of people to write, you know, again, a song that's something that brings us together in thinking about the river, you know, just as treaty and those sorts of things have happened in the past. Is there a, like I said, an author who could write, you know, a beautiful children's book? Or, I mean, I've got this one here at the moment. I haven't read it yet, but, you know, on the river for us as adults. But, you know, I'm just sort of thinking of different ways that we can get this message out further as a combined group like this and others in different layers, because Aboriginal people don't get information in one way. We do it through all these other ways of, you know, dance, song, music, art, you know.
It's beautiful. And also we had a few comments actually exactly on that. How do we get awareness? So what we need to do is also change the perception of what the river is. You know, the river is also the floodplains, is also that. It's not just a canal where there's some little bit of water trickling down and then you can't call that a river. A river is a free, different entity. So the whole idea that we have as Europeans is completely wrong of what the river was.
I think as well, we, you know, Europeans characterize ourselves as being physically distinct and in control of nature. And as has been pointed out multiple times this evening, that's not actually true. Well, I mean, particularly in relation to water, we all depend on, every single living organism on this planet depends on water for its survival. And in a sense, I think we are poorer as people for not feeling that connection, or those amongst us who don't feel that connection, they are poorer in, I think, in spirit and in the way they live. But a big part of what drives me, I mean, I'm a lawyer and I use the kind of legal paradigm and a rational way of thinking in a way to do what I do. But a big part of what drives me is it's a very strong emotional connection to nature, and a strong sense of connection and a feeling of responsibility. But I think that for people who don't feel connected, storytelling, to get back to the point that was being made by Auntie Steph, storytelling is a really powerful mechanism for connecting with people, and for helping them understand why this is so important.
Here's a message from Frederick. We need stories for people living near the Barker who visit there and who know the place. We need different layers of stories and awareness. So this is really what is coming out, that we really need to talk more and be more interconnected, you know, with between us and with nature, which is what, you know, really what we're missing out here. This beautiful, wonderful river. There was at the beginning of the of this quarterly essay, there was a description of Auntie Badger when he talks about the river, the Murray and the Lower Barker, and he says, you know, he points with the fingers and he says this starts from here, then it goes up and it goes here, and this is the down. So it's a whole body, and the lungs are South Australia, and this is the magic of it. This is life. And we're missing out on that just for more crops and more whatever it is that we make money out of. So the perception needs to change.
There's something I think you should get excited about. I mean, last year we had the big corroboree on the rivers, but this year it won't happen. But in 2021, next year it'll happen to be bigger and better. But at the end of the year, this year, after if all this COVID stuff disappears, we want to bring those river communities here to Sydney. We want to put on a gathering here in Sydney, bring those stories, bring Uncle Badger in, bring all those people in. You know, Stephanie, you'll all get involved. But that's what I want to do. We want to get that awareness out with the people here in Sydney. I want to do what Vincent Lingari done. He came from his country, the Gurindji mob. He came to Sydney, and that's where he's got his support. So what we need to do is bring our communities, our river communities, the river people here now to the big city. And we want to bring their stories, and we want to go global. I think that's what we need to do. And we all should get behind it. I mean, we got support from, a lot of people, non-Indigenous people as well, because the water affects all of us. But that's what's in the plan now. That's what we're trying to organise. And I'll give all you fellas information as we get closer and get it organised. But I believe that's what we need to do.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, here you have someone helping out already. Sofia Ayano. I work in public relations. I would love to help. So we're moving forward. Well, anyone else would like to say something, or we just wrap up? Anything that has been left out that you would like to add or say? Okay, that's it then. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter, for starting this whole conversation with your film, and thank you, Uncle Bruce and Auntie Steph, and thank you, Emma, and let's hope that we can do something all together and change it for the best.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you to all the speakers. It's been very profound. Thank you.
Can I ask where we can access the recording of this later on if we want to revisit it?
Yes, I don't know how to answer that question, but if you get to us, Amnesty, we have a copy. So
okay, thank you for that.
It's in the cloud at the moment, so we'll get it down from the cloud and. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Sylvia, and thanks everyone for listening and participating, and let's really make something of this. Yeah, we've got a cause that really deserves to be given everything.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi, and thank you very much, everyone. It's been fantastic.
Hey, Kirsty.
See ya.
Bye. Thanks.